Hello, and thank you for joining me for the 8th Data Analysis Bootcamp class. We're getting close to the end now. So we're going to go over interactive, Plotly Express, and how Plotly is originally designed for making dashboards, but Plotly Express allows these really beautiful one-off plots that give you almost allows you to go really essentially deeper into your data analysis and really understand things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, and some very selective kind of and some really cool interactivity that you can get with the plot, and allows you to go a step further than you could with something like Seaborn, where you'd have to actually go back to the data frame to be able to explore your data further. Okay, so but before we start on this, before we go over this, let's go over the mnemonics from last class. In our mnemonics from last class, we first talked about using the duplicates function to be able to identify when we have repeating rows, and we can use the the Boolean series that's created from that to select out the row of interest, the one that's duplicated, and inspect that a little bit further, understand why it could possibly have been duplicated. Was it just an accident, or is there a reasoning for this? We talked about a handy little shortcut to understand our null values is using the dot is sum, or sorry, the the dot is null dot parentheses dot sum parentheses, and remembering how to do that. A quick and easy little trick to understand how to quickly identify if there are any null values hiding in our data sets. Okay. We talked about how the conversion of our data types is, well, to me, it's a lot like language translating one language to another, and we're able to translate from a string to an integer. Still the same thing, it's still a 3, but now we can do very much different things with it now that it's in the right language, in the right data type. So that Python is really the way that we communicate with Python, subtly we write the code, but underneath the code is Python knows what to do with every given object based on its data types. So we have to be very careful about our data types. I find the more complex I get, the issues that I struggle with, the errors that I get are from not understanding my data type well enough. So it seems simple when we get started, but we always have to pay attention to this, as it's a subtle way that we communicate with Python. Okay. We talked about cleaning our strings so that we can encode and then eventually decode them. And this is a really valuable technique. Just we want to make things, when you're dealing with NLP type of tasks, it is a little bit more tedious, usually a little bit more tedious, but we're really trying to clean things up and make them reduce the number that we're seeing so that we could essentially encode them to do mathematics on them. Okay. We talked about treating and either truncating or essentially just removing the row when we have an outlier, and deciding we want to identify outliers and either trimming the hedges, truncating, and bringing those outliers into a less extreme value. So they're still there, but they're not making such an impact on the mathematics. Or if we're not able to explain it, just essentially getting rid of that row altogether. Okay. We talked about how we can have summary statistics, mean, min, max, median, some very standard summary statistics that we can use on our Einstein friend here in a box with his abacus can help us do the mathematics. We often use those simple summary statistics or functions on a function called group by. Okay, so what we're going to do with the group by is we're going to group by one value, one category, and group by the classes in this. Okay, so either like the color of the fruit, grouping by green here, and then we'll aggregate this with the min, the max, the standard deviation, the count, and by aggravating it, we're going to transform it into where every row represents a class, and the summary statistic is, for this column 1, the average was this, column 2, the average was this, for each class now. So we're grouping by and getting a summary statistic by each class. Cross section is a little bit different. Similar concept is we're going to, instead of just dividing it by grouping it by one statistic, we're going to essentially be dividing this in two sections, kind of cross sectioning our data by one, splitting it in one direction on a horizontal or vertical by one column, separating it by this, and then vertically as well, we can do that. So kind of cross sectioning our data, and then we can put a summary statistic into this one quadrant when it's male, that are older, women that are younger, and so everyone will have those different quadrants, and we can get more specific averages for each one of those. Okay, it's very similar to a pivot table. Okay, we talked about ways to join the data. The more simpler one, or the simpler to think through, is the concat, which is really where we're sticking data together, usually horizontally, but it can be vertically as well. And you're just lining things up on the index values or lining things up on column names, but if there's no matching, you're just really sticking data together. Okay, so you have to be aware of those index values, column names in this, and it's really just sticking data together. Like we have our people on the Titanic here walking, just arm in arm together. And that's really what you're doing. You're just sticking more data on to the side. Okay. It's a really good one to use in a loop because it's kind of easy just putting more data onto it. This one right here, joining the other type of data combination that's really common is the merge, which is very similar to the SQL join. And you're going to join on, so we're going to merge on a certain, usually the ID column or a date column, and we're going to bring in new data. Usually on, if you have a date one, you're bringing in two unrelated things. If they happen over time, you can usually connect them on the time feature, like every day sort of thing, because time's kind of a consistent thing in a time series, and so you'd be able to connect time series data sets really easily using that. Okay. We talked about encoding, where we're going to really kind of flip the switch. One hot encoding is a way to allow us to identify when something is true, one for true, zero for false, and this can allow us to use categories in many ways in our data analysis, getting into our machine learning models. But here we can tell really the relationship if this is true. If it is a male, what's the relationship versus if it's not? If they have brown hair, blue eyes, one of those characteristics, and you can look and really do correlation analysis with other continuous variables. It's not perfect, but you start to get a sense of that with this. And then we can even do, we talked about the last thing that we talked about was the shifting of our continuous of our features. So we're essentially bringing the past into the future, and we're going to move yesterday's value into today. And for financial math, lots of times you'll need the closing value of the previous day as the starting value in your next set of calculations. And so you need to essentially shift that down one to be able to perform that operation. Okay, because really you can only do mathematics across the row. Rows don't really talk to each other. Kind of your enclosed environment, the world, the day in the life of your data is really one row at a time. Okay. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff on the slides that I didn't cover, so it's good to go back and read through everything. That was really the goal in designing this class, is to give you a reason to come back and go through the class. But we used a lot of mnemonics, so logical colors, logical pictures, to help us kind of have a way back, an avenue back to those the knowledge that we discussed today. Color associations, word associations help a little bit. We discussed a lot of things in visual 3D shapes, kind of space and stuff to help us, our brains just work better that way. One of the goals that you would do is to go back and recall these things, to review the information that we discussed today, and really just read through it one time. Read through the slides that you'll be able to download either down below or up above, and really see if you can. You don't have to force yourself, but just one quick review, and then see if, in a week from now, see how much you still remember. It's really quite amazing. Okay. So let's go back and let's get started on our Plotly class today.